Shalom and welcome to Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle here on lamnetwork.tv, where we interview people who've been walking the life of Torah for a while now, to give you the hope that you're not alone in your understanding, that God still cares about his commandments and still considers them the standard of holy life and wants us to live by them through the lens of the finished work of Yeshua the Messiah. My name is Daryl Weinberg of A Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and I'm honored to be your host. Well, last week we had a very exciting interview with Fred Wiening of the Great Canadian Awakening, and his story is so compelling that I thought we needed to do two, because this week we're actually going to be discussing what the Great Canadian Awakening is and what his work in that involves. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you.
Good to have you back, and happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you. It was a fun day, beautiful weather, and lots of, I guess it wasn't too chaotic around here, but everybody was having a good time.
Yes, as we were recording this on Sunday here. So last week we had the opportunity to delve into a bit of your family's history, knowing that you had a couple of grandfathers that were involved in the underground resistance, hiding Jewish people during the Second World War, all very heady stuff. And this is something that you've been kind of learning. And we also talked a little bit about your awakening, as it were, to the understanding that, as I said in the introduction, that God still cares about his commandments. He still cares that people walk in obedience, and that's been quite a journey for you. And of course, our meeting was very much involved with all of that, sort of, I guess, taking it to the next level. And we're really excited to be partnering up with you and co-laboring with you in the field. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Great Canadian Awakening is? What was your inspiration? And why did you feel that you were the one to do something?
Okay, well, that's a really good question, and that's very easy to answer. Well, as you may or may not know, or your audience, in the U.S., there is also a movement happening. Their battles are somewhat different than Canada, but on the other hand, they're very much the same. So there's a gentleman in the U.S. by the name of Clay Clark who began something, I guess, probably 2 years ago now, called the Reawakening America. And it was a tour, and they would go from city to city, on average once a month, maybe to a different city. Began in Tulsa, Oklahoma at actually it was in the facility where my brother Adrian, who's a pastor, where he graduated from, a Rhema Bible Training Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was the first one. I think they had over 5,000 people at that in their inaugural event. Anyway, wow. It was about a year and a half later, and it was in October of 2021, where one of my brothers noticed that the event was coming to Pennsylvania, a little town in Pennsylvania, a little Mennonite town actually, called Mannheim, which is obviously German roots. And yeah, so that was doable for us to get to that. The mandates as far as crossing the border were still basically on. At that time, I guess it was, I'm trying to think now. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then it was hard to go into the U.S. at that point. Previous to that, right. It was the other way around. It was harder to get back into Canada. But anyway, we decided we were going to go. It was about an 8-hour drive from the Greater Toronto area. And we jumped in our truck early one Thursday morning. My brother drove, and we got there Thursday night, and the meetings began Friday morning. So it was very, very inspirational. I'm myself, the oldest of 8, and my second brother and third brother, the three of us went, Fred, Adrian, and Ron. And yeah, it wasn't very far into it. And I said to them, we need to take this to Canada. The Canadians need to have something like this.
So tell us a little bit about what happened at the conference. Why, what really spoke to you about it?
Okay, so while we were there, it was an amazing display of patriotism, which we all know the Americans are more patriotic, I think, in their display than we as Canadians are. I think we are every bit as patriotic. We just don't we don't vocalize it as much. So,
Right.
but what was amazing is that it was such a variety of topics, which obviously it was all sparked by the COVID narrative. That was the spark, I guess, that got everything going. Yeah, including that event. Yeah. So what we were really impressed with was they had such a variety of subject matter. General Michael Flynn was there. We got to meet him. We actually invited him to Canada, and he said, "As long as I don't have to take a jab." But anyway, that never happened. We realized once we got into planning our event, we really didn't need the U.S. content that we thought we would maybe need, because many Canadians are basically oblivious to U.S. Foreign policy or U.S. politics. So the only Americans that we actually did have was the producers of the Died Suddenly DVD with Stu Peters. We had those
Hmm.
fellas, and I knew them a little bit. I didn't know them well, but I knew them from a Facebook connection, as well as I had visited the church where some of them were attending back in 2018. So yeah,
Hmm.
so those are the only Americans that we actually had. But yeah, it was the variety of subjects, with the common core of truth, really. That's the thing. And it was a mix. Not everybody was necessarily a believer, but they all had a message. And that's what resonated with me. Even though we had seen the convoy, we had seen so many freedom events already in Canada, but most of the events were focused on one subject in particular, whether it was health or, medical or political, where this was all encompassing. And that's what I thought was so amazing about it. So, yeah, that's why. So,
Okay. And so you walked away inspired, and you said, "Well, Canada really need this." Now, for a lot of our listeners, they're from the United States, so maybe you can contrast what you saw the differences were between the situation in the U.S. versus Canada, and what you really felt the Canadian version of this needed to focus on.
yeah. So, like I said, we had General Michael Flynn. Even Eric Trump was there. I think he came in by Zoom. So we basically got to experience an event that we saw the technical ability of something like this when it was done right, to bring in speakers and people that were not even necessarily in the building. Um,
Right.
so um, Bull Paulney, for instance, was one of the speakers, and his message is about precious metals and the value of real money, as opposed to paper bills or even credit and all that. So, and then there was a huge area for merchandise where you could buy books or different people. And so we had something similar in our event. We didn't probably have it quite as crowded, but don't forget that was their 12th or 15th event. It was our first one. So
Right.
we were just really trying to lay the groundwork. And we immediately went to Canada Christian College. You were there. They were so accommodating. I had been to 3 or 4 events previous, so I knew that they were very open to the concept, because of just what I had seen. Rebel News had been there, and Christine Anderson I had seen there. So
Yeah, and
yeah, it was.
that was a beautiful facility.
Yeah, it was a facility that was unbelievable, second to none. I can't
Hmm.
really think of anything that would match what they offered, as far as a meeting place. So yeah, we were
Hmm.
excited about that, and that was early on in the process, so it was good. Yeah.
Okay. And so what was it? What did you feel based on what you saw at the U.S. event? What was it that Canada really needed to hear?
Well, I think the one thing was the unifying effect. The U.S. event had a little bit more, probably I'm going to say military content. There was a lot of I guess we would call them, vets of different things. We didn't really have that. We don't have that much of a focus on that in Canada. The government gives lip service to it, but
Yeah.
mainly what we saw was from the audience how well received all these various subjects were, and not only that, it was how they tied together. They tied together. You couldn't, during the COVID era, we'll say, or whatever you want to call it, you couldn't separate the politics from the medical, from the
Right.
from the spiritual side. They were all so interlinked, and so we had pastors there speaking, and it was just unbelievable. And what motivated me so early on in my journey into the COVID thing was when all the when the believers bought into this thing. Like, I get that there can be a pandemic. The Bible talks about it all the time, or they don't use the word of pandemic, but diseases and plagues and that. But the Bible tells us in Psalm 91 that He will protect us from that. He says,
Mm.
no thing will come near you, no sickness will come near you if we will honor Him. And that's what I felt so strongly about right from day one, is that why are these people submitting to this thing, acknowledging, even if it was real, we are more than conquerors through Christ who strengthens us. And and it was so hard to hear that message from a church that I said, if we put this meeting together, we get to be in charge of the message to some degree. Like, we didn't censor anyone. We just, and like I said, we just let people share their heart. And it was amazing. And it was, in some ways, like I said to you last week, we were preaching to the choir, I think. But so a lot of like-minded individuals, it was reinforcement for them. But it was also fuel. It's fuel for our spirit, fuel for our soul to realize that we're not in this battle alone, whether it's spiritual or physical or mental, which is a huge part of it. There's many of us. There's many of us on this journey. And
and I think that was what I had even mentioned last week, is that my wife and I, we walked away from that conference feeling very refreshed. I mean, we were honored in ways that I couldn't even begin to imagine. We just registered as participants, and then when you reached out to me and you brought us into various meetings and stuff like that, we were blessed beyond measure. But just the energy, and to be able to interact with all of those people who are like-minded and are hungry for truth, and to see the passion of the people from stage, and just to get our tires pumped for 2 straight days was a real blessing. We walked away from there feeling exhausted, but encouraged and enthused at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we heard from everybody. So as far as what made me think, like, getting back to your earlier question, I've always been, I've been in business since I was 27, so 25 or more years. I've always been a bit of a risk taker, sometimes to my own chagrin. But I feel that if we do not step out and take a risk once in a while, how will we know? I don't know. I feel that risk taking is part of the journey of understanding how to hear the voice of God. I often share with people how it's a trial and error thing. You might think it's a feeling, or you might think it's your own, but it's a journey. It's like understanding children fall when they first learn to walk. Well, you may have to fall and realize, oh, I guess that wasn't such a great idea or whatever. And when I had that notion in my head that we should bring this to Canada, I didn't drop it. I immediately got to work on it, because, as a matter of fact, funny enough, thinking back from last October or November when we set the wheels in motion, I said to my brothers, I said, you think this thing will be too little too late? You think by May of next year, it'll all blown over and things will be normal again? Like, that was, if I had any fear, it was going to be that we had a message that was no longer relevant. That was, because we took 6 months to organize it. We maybe could have done it quicker, but I said right from the get-go, we want to wait till there's good weather. We don't want to be in a blizzard, and we want to give people ample time, not only for us as planners, give people time to react and to using social media to try to promote it and whatever we could. So when we first booked the facility, I said, "Are we rushing this?" And they said, "No, you're very good timing. You're giving yourself lots of time compared to most events that would rank in that class." So that was good. And then the people, when we started, I don't know if I shared it last week, it was Laura Lynn Tyler that was the first person that we approached, as well as Imad Burgos, the two co-hosts. Imad was a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine. And so when she said yes, and then the third was Pastor Arthur Pulowski said yes, then we basically started name dropping and just saying, this is what we're doing. And so, and I made an effort to go to other events where I knew that I could meet like-minded people, and where I knew I could meet potential speakers, like some of the Bright Light News events. So yeah, it was a huge step of faith, but what could be the worst that could happen? Like, nobody shows up and we learn something. I think that's part of what I have done for my whole my career, really, my business. It's like trying something and figuring it out, and yeah, I guess just letting the Lord lead, for one thing. And that part of it, the planning went very, very smooth, really unbelievably smooth. It was almost like the thing were falling into place, and we just had to guide them into their sockets. And you've met some of the other people that were helping, and they were amazing. The Lord sent some people right early on, and that was it. So exciting.
Right. So tell me a little bit about what the vision is. So you've set up a nonprofit.
Yes.
What is the name of it, and what was your inspiration for it?
Okay, so we wanted to use, early on, we wanted to use a Canadian theme. We wanted to have awakening. Obviously we couldn't say Reawaken America. And I felt we couldn't say Reawaken Canada, because I'm not sure Canada's ever been awake to the degree that I would like it to be. So, and I didn't really want to steal that, So as I wrote out the word, and I took one of my business cards here, and I'm going to stick it in front of the screen for your audience to see. So the first thing I did early on after I made the message was I went to a friend of mine to design a logo, and I just said, "This is what I'm envisioning: a Canadian flag, a map of Canada." And so here's what it is. And then we added some very, there we go. So anybody that knows anything about Canada knows that we say A. The Americans say y'all, we say A. So those three words, all of them had A in it. And so we put AAA into the thing, and that gave it a bit of and then we actually registered that name and that logo as a trademark. And so the other thing that we thought early on, we obviously we're not nearly as densely populated as the US, and so we couldn't go to every city, but immediately we did think we would like to take it to the provincial capitals in Canada. And so literally, if you go back onto that little thing, we have a star on that map of Canada for every provincial capital. And the objective from day one was to go to every province of Canada and let the people each be a part of this. So Ontario was obviously a good place to start. We have a big population base, and we just went with that. But we do really want to take it across the nation. And we've had people asking, "Where are you going next? Where are you going next?" So we haven't really started to plan the second one yet. We've done some preliminary, like looking for a venue and trying to set a date, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, looks like next one's probably going to be in Alberta.
Right. Now, talk to us a little bit about the nonprofit that you've set up. and
Okay.
how that ties into things.
Sure. So, our nonprofit is actually called 7M Canada Incorporated. So that's another kind of I don't know how you want to say it, but that's a phrase that's been going around in, I would say, that in the moving forward area of Christian world, where we're trying to take authority and we're trying to move and impact all these different areas of society. So I first heard of the 7M concept about 6 or 7 years ago from a gentleman named Lance Wallnau. And he's really gained prominence in those 6 years. But the 7Ms refers to 7 mountains of society: government, business, family, religion, arts and entertainment. Shoot, I always draw a blank when I get near the end. Anyway, there's 7. You can look it up, 7M. So as I thinking of that, but I was meditating a lot on the 7M name, but I felt that we could maybe make a little different twist to it and call it 7 mandates. So, it's a double meaning thing, whether it's 7 mountains or 7 mandates. Or I believe I'm working through that vision statement right now to say, okay, well, what are the mandates that go with the mountain? So some of them are very easy. I was talking to people about this just even this morning, like, the mandate as a father to be married to a wife, Genesis 1 man, 1 woman, have your children. Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart. And that scripture is loaded with meaning that goes way beyond that. You'd probably know this. It's actually referring to touch the palate of a child, give him maple syrup when he's 1 and he'll be hooked for life. And so that's what it's referring to: establish a pattern in their life that will become part of who they are. And so that's just the area of family. And so now I'm thinking, okay, what's the mandate? If we think about the mandate. So there's a few that I have kind of thinking. What's the mandate for religion? Well, the mandate is to go ye into all the world and preach the gospel, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so there's a very clear mandate that Jesus gave us for reaching the world. And so let's find out, well, what's the mandate for government? Well, that's easy. The Bible's loaded with government initiatives and government leading. So right now, that's what I'm doing, is to basically create kind of a vision statement, which would probably be a 1-page document that highlights the areas of how the mandates. What's the mandate for the mountain? And you mentioned to me that maybe you have some insight into that, so I'm looking forward to hearing that. So, right. And then taking it across the nation, like there's revival breaking out all across this country and in all those areas. So I'm super excited in politics as well, or like God's moving. So I want to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, the 7 mountain mandate was originated by, I did a message on this last year, by Lauren Cunningham from YWAM, Youth with a Mission.
You're right. And I knew that. Yes.
She had a vision back in 1975, and she said, my family and I were enjoying the peace and quiet of a borrowed cabin in the Colorado Rockies. I was stretched out on a lounge chair in the midday warmth, praying and thinking. I was considering how we Christians, not just the mission I was part of, but all of us, could turn the world around for Jesus. Yes. A list came to my mind: categories of society which I believe we should focus on in order to turn nations around to God. I wrote them down, stuck the paper in my pocket. The next day I met with a dear brother, the leader of Campus Crusade for Christ, Dr. Bill Bright. He shared with me something God had given him, 7 areas to concentrate on to turn the nations back to God. And they were the same areas with different wording here and there. They were written on the page of my in my pocket. I took it out and showed Bill, and we shook our heads in amazement. And so, it's education, religion, family, business, government, military, arts and entertainment, and media. So what you're saying is that you're really sensing that God wants us to take these 7 areas of influence. And the mountains in scripture are metaphorical for a lot of different things. It's a
Yes.
position of power, a place of authority. I mean, God descended upon Mount Sinai and he gave
Yes.
the commandments there. Dr. Michael Lake actually very recently spoke about mountains actually being the thrones of principalities. And
Yeah.
so in Mark, where Yeshua says that if you had faith, you could move mountains, what he's saying is that you can take authority over these places. Now, I do have to qualify that those who espouse the 7 mountain mandate, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are adherents to what we call dominion theology or postmillennialism.
Yeah.
And what that essentially means is that we are going to overtake those areas of influence and turn them Christian so that we can prepare the way for Yeshua to come back. In other words, the Lord's not coming back until we set the stage for him. And there are some problems with that kind of eschatology. However, the idea that we should be striving in the strength of the Lord to take back what we have lost, like even in the church, how
Yes,
much of the
exactly.
church has been infected by communism, this whole idea of the separation of church and state, which, well, number one, isn't in the U.S. Constitution. It is a misnomer for what is in the Declaration of Independence. But in Canada, that's not even anywhere in any of our documents. So, to bang that drum is ridiculous.
It is.
So we absolutely need to be rising up and to saying that, no, we're not going to allow the enemy to dictate what we're going to watch in the media or hear in the media anymore. We're not going to put up with the garbage that Disney shoves down our throats and
Yes.
this, woke agenda and all these other things. So, for you to have a sense that we need to be aiming to raise people up and to influence these areas of authority, I think is very exciting. So,
Yeah.
who is involved in your team? And aside from establishing these conferences in different areas of Canada, what else do you see happening? How else do you see God using this movement?
Well, we probably haven't done a lot of study on that yet, but I do feel, well, there's 2 things actually, and you and I have been talking about it. I do feel that there will be some more deeper teaching coming about in smaller areas as a pattern can be established. So, for instance, I'm one of the things I think I mentioned already, the conference idea had come to me already years ago. And it wasn't until this Reawaken tour that it really kind of came to light. Prior to COVID in 2018, I had started to work on a conference called the Lake Country Revival Conference. And what that was intended to be was really just an awakening of Christians and helping them to understand the power of the gospel beyond just salvation, because that's what had me so dismayed as I looked at many. What I don't want to be critical of other people because that's easy for me to do, but we're all on a journey. But it's like, why don't we take the word of God at full value? And in particularly, I'm thinking of the New Testament. Jesus said, greater works than these shall you do. In my name, you shall cast out demons. You shall cleanse. You shall heal the lepers. Like, this was a direct command from Jesus, and yet we never hear about it. So it was interesting. Just this weekend, I don't know if you, in Elmville, Ontario, there was a healing meeting where there was an evangelist that came and preached the message of healing, and many people would get healed. Actually, people got saved, and people were filled with the Spirit, and all different things. And when I hear people say, well, that's not for today, or it's not God's will to heal, I'm saying, well, it's it says that that's what we're to do. And Jesus went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil. So understanding that there was no sickness and disease in the Garden of Eden, this is a work of the enemy, is very, very plain and simple. And it was part of what Jesus paid for on the cross. So anyway,
Right.
this past weekend, many people were healed, and maybe not all of them were healed. I can't speak to that, but when I talk to people, I says, "Well, not everybody gets saved either. Does that mean you quit preaching salvation?" But guess what? A lot more people get saved when you preach it than when you don't, and a lot more people
Right.
get healed when you preach it than when you don't. Like it's
Right.
the faith. It's building people's faith in the Word of God, and so I think on a macro or a smaller level, there will be something established in that area, and like we talked about in education. So these are all mountains that need to be taken. And for the people that would say, "Oh, it's not our job," what do you mean it's not our job? It is our job. And so the other thing, and this clicks in with our logo on that business card I showed you. I'm going to put it up once more. Here it is. At
Hmm.
the very bottom of that, it says, "He shall have dominion also from sea to sea." And that is engraved on our parliament buildings. So if he shall have dominion from sea to sea, that means that, and it's, yeah, so I don't mean to say anything about your dominionism, but what I'm saying is God has given us authority, that it's our job to reach the nations. And our founders of our nation basically had the foresight to engrave that right into our parliament buildings, very, very high, that it's not very hard to, it's very difficult to remove. So
Mm.
we can say that the U.S. has a godly foundation. Well, we have every bit as much of a godly foundation in this nation, and it's time we recognize it, and it's time we stand up. Like all this stuff going on in the schools, if
Mm.
we had our people in the school boards, I don't know. I think it would be a tougher battle for the enemy to railroad us in this way, and town councils, and so that's another whole area.
Well,
Um,
what God has really shown me over this past, I guess, past year is that freedom is always to be defended.
yeah,
And because there's always people who want to take it away from you. And if you let them do so, then to get the freedom back is going to be a lot more difficult. It's easier to guard something than it is to retrieve it when it's been taken from you.
yes, yes,
And, part of the judgment or part of the consequences of our actions of being asleep at the wheel, and the church has really been asleep for the past two generations, really since World War II.
yes,
Um, North America really hasn't had to deal with a whole lot. I mean, okay, fine. We had the Korean War, which Canada did participate in. We weren't involved in Vietnam whatsoever, which was a completely bogus war. The
yeah,
more we learn about it, understanding that that was just the military industrial complex sending soldiers off to die and making millions in the process.
yes,
But
exactly.
for because we were comfortable, because we had a strong Christian foundation, we allowed ourselves to get complacent, and the enemy, who's constantly working, I've been saying for a while that he that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, but neither does the devil. And so
Yes,
they're constantly working. And the Masons, because they believe in reincarnation, they're willing to sacrifice their lives and work their entire lives for the greater goal. And
yes,
we have allowed all of these things, all seven mountains that are spoken of, at one time belonged to the church. I
yes,
mean, just
exactly.
stop and think about that for a moment. It was Christians who dominated government, or at least God-fearing people.
Yes,
It was Christians who, of course, dominated the church. I wouldn't say that is the case anymore. It was Christians that dominated the arts and entertainment industry. You go back to some of the TV shows, and like Leave It to Beaver
yeah,
and what's it called, the Andy Griffith Show. They were wholesome shows by comparison. Look what you got today. But that's
yeah,
because we allowed the foxes to creep into the hen house and take over. But now what God is saying is that, well, I'll give you your freedom back, but you got to fight for it.
Exactly. And so I just finished reading through the book of Isaiah, and now I'm halfway into Ezekiel. No, not Ezekiel, Jeremiah. And what strikes me so much is that how the thing that God detested the most, number one, was sacrificing their children to Baal. And we're in that war right now. And that's huge, even though most people are oblivious to really what's going on in that area. But also that, he continuously, and this gets into what we were talking about the Sabbath a little bit. So often that's brought up, even today in my reading today, it was talking about that, or even the food laws, which are all, I'm more and more convinced that they're very relevant. I think I mentioned to you that I read the book about 10 years ago called The Maker's Diet.
Right.
It's very, very good. And then when I'm reading Isaiah the other day, it's 3 or 4 times it said, and they were eating the flesh of swine. So if our menu said the flesh of swine, or if it said, sausages or bacon, the flesh of swine doesn't sound quite as yummy as bacon. And so I'm not saying that I've totally moved in that direction, but it starts with an awareness and a knowing. And it's like, okay, you know what I mean? It's like a constant reinforcing. Okay, Lord, I know, and understanding what those animals were intended to do. This is all part of the journey that I feel that we're on to bring ourselves, like, when Jesus said he's coming back for a spotless bride. Well, what's a spotless bride look like? And does it look like someone that's still wallowing in the old life, or does it look like someone that's moving in victory, understands his authority, understands that we are kings and priests, not of our own doing, but we are kings and priests under his authority. He's given, all authority has been given unto me in heaven and on earth, and therefore go ye. Like, it's really a pretty basic thing. Like, we're commanders in the army, so let's get with the program. And that's what I feel will be another part of the Great Canadian Awakening. Will be going deeper in a variety of subjects. Like, the Great Canadian Awakening is very all-encompassing, and really I consider it like a harvest field. We're bringing people in, they're going to hear the gospel, but we also want to encourage people to find out their calling, understand their calling. Like, there's millions of people who go through life every single day in misery because they don't know their calling. They don't know that they have a job to do that's very real and very, very necessary. And so there's a lot of wasted energy, wasted talent that's not being motivated. And I feel the Lord should rally the troops, find guys like Daryl Weinberg that can, if we all walk in our lane, that's all we need to do. Just find your lane and go for it and be faithful in your lane. It's not really rocket science.
Well, no, it's not. But at the same time, there just seems to be such resistance. I mean, as you have begun to embrace the commandments and begin to understand that God still expects us to be obedient to them, and that the cross didn't change that. How much of, and I don't know if you've even gotten any revelation on this, but how much of the awakening has to do with us returning to obedience to God's commands? I mean, how much does the whole theological journey that you're on, and us meeting, and you reading the book and everything else, how much do you think that really plays in whether Canada really wakens up or not?
Well, I think it's significant because as I'm out and about now, talking with people, there's so many others that are on a similar journey, we'll say. Like, we're all at different places. And it's just amazing that people are open and receptive to
Hmm.
to try to understand, well, why is it? I think I said it. Why, especially concerning the Sabbath, why is it that we work so diligently to obey 9 out of the 10 commandments, and yet this other one just doesn't seem to really matter that much? Or, it's a seventh day, not the, like, I don't know. Like, when you learn to question everything, and it's just, okay, well, why do we do this? Well, do we do it only out of tradition? Or, and there's so many things in our lives, and not that traditions are bad, but understanding the roots of the traditions and understanding why they were implemented in the first place, or and that's why I think the Old Testament is so important. And there's a lot of things I question in the Old Testament still too, so I would say, yeah, we're to live by the New Testament, but like when it comes to things like what you would say is the law, which ones, some of them we can't. Like, we can't go to the temple in Jerusalem and make offerings. Well, that was a command to the Israelites. Well, that's not something that we physically can do. So my journey now, and maybe you can help me through that, is, okay, well, what does that mean for someone in North America who, we know that Jesus paid the ultimate sacrifice. We do not have to sacrifice sheep and lambs, but yet that was part of the law written then. So deciphering, what is the command for us today, even though Jesus fulfilled, that whole, all the gray areas that fall in there, and walking by our conscience, and learning to walk in truth is a very, very difficult journey, I think, that requires a lot of study.
Well, yes, and I've said for many years that the essence of salvation is very simple. If you confess with your mouth Yeshua is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Yeah. After that, it is when you got to roll up your sleeves, and you have to start applying a little bit of elbow grease.
Yeah.
Because salvation is simple. The life of sanctification, although simple, is not easy, because then you have to constantly wrestle against the flesh. And we've got to come against a lot of bad theology. I mean, that was the whole reason why I wrote the book, is to correct a lot of the errors that we've had come down for 1900 years through the church.
Yes.
And so for me, the Great Canadian Awakening is something that I've been crying out for years, because, listen, I've been banging the drum of being awake in Canada for close to 20 years now, I would say. I started to really wake up around 2004, 2005, when I really began to understand just how deep the rabbit hole goes. I've always been kind of an outsider I've never been a conformist. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, neither have I.
And that's the reason why I came to faith in a Jewish context. But what I see for the awakening is that in order for God to give people a discernment, they have to be obedient. If they're not going to be obedient, the reason why so many Christians, I think, bought in to the narrative that was being promoted by the government, the media, and the Seven Mountains, is because they weren't being obedient. So God gave them He didn't give them eyes to see.
Yeah.
And I think that the more we draw back to being obedient to God's commandments, the more we'll be aware of what goes on around us. So I think what you're doing is such an integral part of that whole thing. I mean, I honestly, for many years, I feel like I've been a voice crying in the wilderness. And it's like, why won't anybody listen? And yet here you are developing a whole platform to take this idea of awakening, which I think a lot of people are doing. And that's because the enemy has so overplayed his hand, because it's starting to fall apart. I mean, the COVID narrative, they thought that they were going to have this whole thing wrapped up, and that they were going to set the stage for the Antichrist to rise to power. And yet, I think because of the prayers of the saints that we've been constantly breaking down the demonic power behind all of this. And so now you have a whole bunch of people who are starting to wake up. And I think in conjunction with that, they're starting to wake up that the church has lied to them. Because let's be honest, the church failed, and I'm talking about the body at large, failed the vast majority of people during COVID. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. I would agree. Like that's what I say. I'm so dismayed because it's like, and I've often said, Lord, why is it that I could see through this? And much of what my intuition was early on in early 2020, it took 2.5 years for the evidence to come about that I knew in my spirit from day one. But that was also because of the journey that, the thing of question everything. Well, if they lied to us about this, why, it just didn't make any sense, or understanding I had heard about the World Economic Forum before that, although I guess who are these people? Who put them in power? Or, just some basic understanding of what the mission of the Antichrist is, or, the number of his name, 666, and all those things.
Yeah.
I had learned about that. And so, and it goes into other areas that we haven't even discussed. I may have mentioned it to you before, but there's so much more. Like, we could have a 2 or 3 day conference on individual subjects where we could have 10 speakers talk about the same subject for a whole weekend and still just scratch the surface, because there's so much more. COVID is just the tip of the iceberg. I feel it's like the tip of the spear. It's kind of where Satan tipped his hand a little too far.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it, but he just, and I think, and the other thing that comes to mind is, as we talk about why me, we got to realize that the Lord is going to use a remnant. I don't think it's the masses at the beginning. It's the remnant. And so I feel right now there is a remnant, and it's becoming more and more evident every day. And as the remnant learns to hear the voice of God in their wheelhouse, in their area of expertise, and to have a closer and better understanding of what his plan is, it's gonna find its way. It's gonna find its way. It's like seeds dropping on the ground. They're gonna sprout and they're gonna produce a harvest. That's how I look at it. So.
Yeah. To get the attention of everybody and to help them to see what we've seen for quite a while now. And I completely understand, the heart of God when I have this picture of him just going,
yeah.
Why don't they get it?
I know. I love that image. That's what I tell people. The name, you'll never figure out what this name is. God bopping himself on the head. It's a lot of times is bruised.
No, and I mean, I don't have it hung up in our new house yet, but I have this sign on the wall, where it says "Bang Head Here," and sometimes you look at people and you ask yourself, how is it that you could be so blind? And I think in part it's God gives them over to the desires of their heart. And because people are so unwilling to be obedient, I mean, how is it that Israel, despite seeing the 10 plagues, seeing the parting of the Red Sea, the destroying of the Egyptian army, the manna being dropped in the desert, God thundering and lightning on Mount Sinai, being given the commandments, water coming from the rock. I mean, he was just with them every step of the way.
Yeah.
And yet when it came time for them to take the land, their attitude was, well, God brought us here to kill us.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
I read that and I mean, I smack my head.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's the same thing with the way people are in Canada. how many people do you still go to the store and see with them wearing masks?
Well, it was because of the fire last week.
Well, yeah. I mean, now we've got a new excuse.
I know.
But you still go to the store and you still see people who are wearing masks because they're afraid of COVID.
I know.
And I asked someone, I was at a store one night, and I asked someone who, he was obviously not happy about it, but it was right in Toronto, and he was saying that the store really preferred them. I said, well, she's not wearing it over there. And I said, you see all these other people around you. Do you see them getting COVID? So I said, take the thing off already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, but how many people have been sucked into that? How many people don't see? So I think that really the key to us awakening everybody is we have to pray against this spirit of delusion, this witchcraft that has overtaken every society in the world. And the revelation that God gave me a few months ago was that the reason why we're under tyranny is because we've rejected his law. And so therefore he's given us man's law.
But it's interesting you say that, because it goes even beyond that. Like when you talked about the Israelites and all the things that were done. And so now, like reading through Isaiah now into Jeremiah, it's like God explains himself over and over and over again. He's so patient. He says, well, but you brought this on yourselves, like the whole, offering their children to Molech and all that stuff. That was so detestable. And yet, it even, to a verse today, it said it never even entered into God's mind that this was something that was doable. And now his own people are doing it. Like they just got they got their focus so much off of the Torah, which is what they had, right? Or off of the law, that they didn't even see that their neighbors, which they were supposed to destroy. And that's another thing, talking about the Nephilim and the giants and all the people that inhabited that land.
Right.
And there's even a connection with some of the Johnny Enlow teacher, how, all the ites of that day, how each one of them was connected to a different one of those mountains. It's pretty fascinating little subject. I just read that a little while ago, but like, how can these people who had seen so much of God's goodness and faithfulness totally reject it and basically offer up their children and do all this other weird, crazy stuff, or it's funny how the Bible mocks them with their idols, these man-made wooden and stone images that hear not and speak not, It's just like, how dumb do you got to be to think that this thing's going to change your life?
Yeah. You cut it down, you carve it out, and then you bow down to it.
Exactly.
You made it, but it's going to save you. It's like, boy. And so God shows the complete fallacy. But so, just to kind of wind it down here, what's next for the Great Canadian Awakening? You and I have been talking about establishing a division of this called the Great Canadian Education Awakening, because it was Lenin who said, give me 4 years with the kids and I don't care what the parents teach them.
Exactly. And the funny thing is about the education. So when we first started the Great Canadian Awakening, like 6-8 months ago, the 7M concept was not even in my mind back then. It wasn't until later on when we realized we had to set up a company, and then, well, what do you call it? Well, then it all kind of started to tie together. And the funny thing is that the conference in Whitby, education was the one area that we didn't even touch. We had nobody speaking in particular. Like there was maybe some little general comments, but we had nobody focus on that area. The other one was on currency, which would be business and finance. So, which they did in the U.S. with Bo Polney. And so there's one other little thing that I would like to just mention a minute before we wrap down is this whole thing about money and currency. And as I asked the Lord to kind of show me, it's like, okay, Bo Polney in that one was talking about gold and silver and lasting money, stuff that maintains its value all through the ages. And then I was thinking, and I always like to have a New Testament confirmation to whatever it is I'm asking the Lord. And so when the disciples or they were going through, and Peter, I think it was Peter, maybe it was Paul, but he said, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I give unto thee. In the name of Jesus of Nazareth, rise up and walk." So, so there's an example that silver and gold were kind of the ultimate value. The only thing is God's healing power, God's saving power could not be purchased with the main currency of the day, which was established by Jehovah. We'll say it was his currency. Look at all the gold and silver that went into the building of the temple, or that went into the Ark of the Covenant. So it's a currency that was not even established by man. It was a currency that was established by him. And so the other side of the Great Canadian Awakening was we actually went and we minted our own silver bars that have the same logo. So we sold almost $30,000 worth of silver. And so these bars have exactly the same logo. Every little detail, including the little stars for the provincial capitals, is on there. And same thing. It's like, who would have even dreamed? Well, it was the Lord that put that in my heart and said, well, find out what it's going to take to do that. And so we have a 3, a 5, and a 10-ounce bar, which are now being delivered, and we're working on a 1-ounce silver coin. And so the silver coin, which is going to be we'll say it's going to be very affordable for people that want that. We're going to eventually have a set of 13 or 14 where the coin it'll have the Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa on the one side, and it's going to say, "He shall have dominion from sea to sea" on that side of the coin. And the flip side of the coin will have the provincial capital buildings. So the first coins that are in the works as we speak will have the Queen's Park, Toronto on the other side, and it'll say the Great Canadian Awakening. And
amen.
And so
Fred, we've
evolved into a
we've
set
run out of time now, and this is so exciting. We look forward to many more of these. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and bid you a Shavua Tov. Have a great week. Fred, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you these past couple weeks.
Okay.
Shalom, everybody.
Bye.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.